Welcome to today's Hard Asset Podcast with your host, Bill Youngerman. If you are new to our podcast, Bill Youngerman is one of the most experienced precious metals dealers and numismatists in the United States. He is one of only 300 PNG certified dealers, the mark of real excellence in this field. And he is an author and holder of one of the finest rare currency collections in the world. And that's important in light of our subject today. Today we're going to be discussing one of Bill's passions, which is rare currencies. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you, Lou. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Let's start by talking about currency collecting. What do you think are three of the most important things people should know about collecting currency?
Well, unlike coins, paper money has a larger format. And for people who are losing their eyesight like I am, it's enjoyable to look at a bigger picture rather than a small, tiny coin. But besides that, they're visually just more enjoyable to look at. Having said that, it is far more fragile in that it can be torn, burnt, stained, and it requires more knowledge than coin collecting, which is why most currency collectors started off as coin collectors. Having said that, those that make the transition from coin collecting to paper money are hooked for life. In fact, many coin dealers are closet paper money collectors.
How does collecting currency compare to coin collecting, for example, when it comes to potential return on investment?
Paper money collecting has been it's only come into its own probably around since the 1960s. Prior to that, for centuries, literally centuries, coin collecting was the thing. Even for kings and people down through the centuries have collected coins. But paper money was not really looked at that much. And of course, it didn't even come into existence until the 14th century. So that being said, paper money has become way undervalued in many cases, which is why we looked at it in around the 1990s and said, this is an area of collecting that has great potential.
Now, you are considered a dean in the area of currency collecting, having written your own reference book on an area of particular interest, Bill, Florida banknotes, which we'll be discussing in a moment. And you have many numismatic interests. What got you interested in collecting currencies in the first place?
Around the 1990s, I was looking for areas of numismatics that were undervalued. And I had the opportunity to buy a few currency collections. And as I started to study them and spend a lot of time involved in looking at currency and saw the beauty of it, and then I started to compare the rarity of currency compared to rare coins. And I found that they were grossly undervalued and had upside potential. It just needed a little promoting, a little bit of work to make people aware of its potential. And we did that. In fact, we ran an ad at one time in one of our currency papers that earmarked currency and said, compare the rarity of currency to rare coins. And so we took it to an extreme. We actually did a full-page ad of hundreds of banknotes that were rarer than three major rarities in coin collecting. One, the 1804 silver dollar, which was selling for millions of dollars. The 1913 Liberty nickel, which there's only 5 known to exist, which sells for $4 or $5 million. And some other coins that were in the $1 million class. We compared the rarity of some of the banknotes we were offering. Every banknote we issued in that ad had less than 5 known to exist and was selling for less than $2,000 each. When we did that, collectors' ears opened up, their eyes opened up, and we couldn't buy enough banknotes to supply the need. And that has caused a lot of what were coin dealers and coin collectors at the time to start to take a second look at currency and realize the great values that were there and the enjoyment of owning such a piece of paper.
So potential return on investment in currency collecting is huge. But tell us about your own collection.
Well, my own collection started around in the 1990s also, when I discovered Florida banknotes. And having lived in Florida almost my entire life, I said, this is really interesting. And I thought, is this a collectible series? Is there something that I'm missing here? And as I studied it, I found out that it had tremendous potential. It was very, very interesting because there was 59 different towns in Florida that issued national banknotes.
What exactly is a national banknote?
Well, national banknotes came into existence in 1863 when Abraham Lincoln signed legislation entitled An Act to Provide a National Currency. What a bank was doing prior to this National Currency Act was anybody could open a bank. They call them wildcat banks. And those banks were popping up all over the United States by the thousands. And it was nothing much more than a couple of guys getting together and saying, let's start a bank. And then they would get a hold of the American Banknote Company, and they would send a salesman down, and they would pick out some vignettes and create a piece of currency and call it their bank. And some of it was legitimate, but most of it was not, because of all this currency that was floating around at that time. Plus, during the Civil War period, which was when the national banknotes came out in 1863, the North had certain kinds of paper money backed by nothing. And then the South was creating their Southern states currency, as well as Confederate States of America currency, as well as all these other obsolete, these wildcat banks we call. And so you had all this paper running around, and nobody knew what was worth anything, if it was worth anything at all. So the North came up with this idea that we would have currency backed by government bonds. And what a bank had to do then was, if you wanted to start a bank, you had to come up with hard currency to buy a minimum of $25,000 worth of treasury bonds. Then you would pledge those, you would give those bonds to the United States government for printing 90% of that same value in currency with your bank's name on it. So it would then say, like the First National Bank of Miami, those notes would be backed by government bonds. The first time we'd have a currency that would actually be backed by something. And as long as the North won the war, that currency was of value during those critical years. After the war, it was so successful, they continued this printing of what we call national banknotes all the way until the Great Depression in 1933. And then by 1935, it was totally phased out. And the Federal Reserve System started to print out all the currency. And to this very day, by the way, those notes are still legal tender. They represent tremendously interesting items because each note had its own individual bank charter. It had the name of the bank on it. It had the cashier's signature and the president of the bank's signature on it. It was called hometown currency because it would be the first national bank of that particular town where the bank was located. So people had an affinity towards it because they said, well, that's the bank where we have our house loan. So they had much more confidence in the bank and its ability to sustain itself. And that all worked out very well from 1863 until 1933, when the Great Depression hit so many of the banks and the government had to take them over.
Well, tell us about your own collection. It is a rare collection. It is a fascinating collection. What's in it? And what is the holy grail in your collection? Our
collection started, like I said, about 1992. I discovered Florida currency, and I was so fascinated by it. And I went out and started buying up as many different notes as I could find. And then I started buying up as many different collections that had been assembled. And that ultimately came about by my buying the Barnett Bank collection, which was previously owned by Senator Warren Henderson. And he had spent many years building a fabulous collection of national banknotes and obsolete banknotes of the state of Florida. That, combined with what I had already purchased and bought over the years, came about in 2013 when I combined all these collections together to build what is now the most complete collection of probably any state that has ever been collected in its entirety. I have everything from the colonial period of Florida, which is very limited, all the way to even modern currencies and tokens and metals and just about everything you can imagine. But the banknote of the national banknote part of my collection is the only time it's ever been completed as a result of my purchase of the First National Bank of Fort Meade, Florida note. That's considered the holy grail of Florida notes collected. It was something that was searched for many, many years by all the collectors. Ever since the 60s, people were trying to find this one note that had never showed up from this town called Fort Meade. That finally appeared a few years ago in an auction sale where we were able to purchase it. It brought, at the time, a world record price. It made it possible for me to have the only complete town collection of banknotes from the state of Florida. In all the years that people collected Florida notes, it was never possible until that note became available. Now, it is unique, but there are 3 or 4 other towns in Florida that are of the same rarity. But because it took for so many years people searching for that one banknote, it became known as the Holy Grail. It showed up in an auction sale, which I was fortunate enough to buy it.
Bill, what is a note like that worth today?
Well, it's like I said, it's not the only unique note in my collection. At the time, it sold for $135,000 in the auction sale. The market is on these kind of items. It's basically whatever two people are willing to fight out in an auction sale for it. When I went to the sale, I thought I'd be able to buy that note for $50,000. And then I thought, well, I might have to go to $75,000. And it boiled down to the last the last $50,000 of the price that was bid in was strictly between me and one other dealer. That's what it brought. And the next time it might appear in a sale, it might bring twice that. We don't know. But it's just a matter of when it comes to these kind of items, it's just a matter of what a willing buyer is willing to pay for it. I can tell you that if somebody offered me $250,000 for it today, they still couldn't buy it. So
I would assume that almost every state has its own banknotes. Is that correct?
Yes, we had all the states that were states prior to 1933 and territories. They're actually the territories of Puerto Rico, Hawaii, and Alaska also issued notes, national bank notes. So those are also very collectible, and most of them are extremely rare. All the other states issued, and basically there were over 12,000 different banks throughout the United States that issued currency, that were national bank notes and received charters. Many of those banks, there are no notes known to even exist on today, because when we went off the national banknote standard, basically the Federal Reserve taking over everything in 1933-35, then all these banknotes were slowly and some very quickly redeemed and done away with. And of that 12,000 banks, many of those banks went out of business or were taken over or dissolved long before 1933. Many of them went out of business in the 1860s, 70s, 80s. Some of them are very, very rare.
If I was interested in getting into currency collecting, Bill, how should I go about it?
With anything, when it comes to collecting, we tell everybody, buy the book first. There are many great books that have been published on, especially national banknotes. The key book that has been published for many years is by a paper money dealer by the name of Don Kelly. And that book is on strictly national banknotes. It's called The National Banknotes. I think the 6th edition is out, and it lists all 12,000 or more banks. It lists all the denominations that were issued. It lists the rarity of them. It lists the year that they were chartered and the year that they went out of business. So it's a very fascinating study. It breaks down all of the national banknotes by state and towns and charter numbers, and it's a great work. That would be the first book I would buy if you're looking to collect national banknotes. We've actually issued a book on Florida national banknotes, which gives all of the rarities of each of the bank's charters. We've kept the actual census of all these towns and banknotes and how many are known to exist by the serial number. That's the uniqueness about a piece of paper money. They all have serial numbers, as opposed to coins that do not. So every note is an individual item. For instance, many people actually collect serial number 1 banknotes, and you can actually get these because they were saved sometimes by the president or the cashier or the family of the bank. And so those come available once in a while, and each note has its own uniqueness because it has a serial number on it. There's a census on all of these different states, and every single bank, they actually keep a census on these. So in Don Kelly's book on national banknotes, you'll actually see how many large size notes are known and how many small size notes are known on each and every bank.
Well, that's fascinating. And if people wanted to get a copy of your book, your reference book on Florida banknotes, how can they go about doing that?
Yeah, they can contact us either by email, bill@youngermans.com, or they can give us a call at our 800 number, 800-327-5010. And we'd be happy to send them one. They sell for $10, and it's not just the volume of the book, but revealed in the book is a census of all the national banknotes known on the state of Florida, which is kept by us, and many people would have to pay serious money to get that information. It's all contained in our book.
Anything else you think we should cover today about rare currency investing that might be helpful to our listeners?
It's just a wonderful hobby. It's a wonderful hobby that turns out to be a great investment. It's very enjoyable. There's a camaraderie that is built around collecting currency, especially national banknotes and obsolete banknotes of these towns. We actually started one some years ago with another fellow collector of Florida notes that meets quarterly in Orlando, and we have like a show and tell, and a bunch of collectors show up. And these are people who've been doing this stuff for all their lives, and it's just a wonderful, wonderful way to build friendships and collect items that extremely interesting, rare, and gives a great pride of ownership to have some of these items.
Well, thank you again, Bill, for your time today for this podcast. Rare currency collecting is a fascinating field, and if you'd like to learn more about it, you can visit williamyoungerman.com and visit their virtual museum. In the museum, you will see many of the unique holdings from the William Youngerman Florida banknote collection we've been talking about today, but also many of the rare world coins in the museum as well, like a 1702 Mexican escudo in near perfect condition, discovered off the Florida coast, that's valued at over $450,000 today, and lots of other rare and fascinating coins and currencies and the backstories of each of these items, which themselves are so interesting. If you'd like to learn more about collecting Florida national banknotes specifically, call William Youngerman at 800-327-5010 and ask for a copy of Bill's reference book on the subject, Collecting Florida National Banknotes. If you'd like to learn more about currency collecting, rare coins, precious metals, and fine collectibles, visit the williamyoungerman.com website and sign up for Bill's new free Hard Assets e-newsletter. In each edition, you'll find an informative feature story or podcast about hard assets, coins, currencies, fine collectibles. You'll also see Bill's precious metals trends chart and commentary, plus a featured hard asset item, its backstory, and today's investment value. You'll also see new high-value items in the William Youngerman Vault. A lot of information. It's a bi-weekly. It's great. You'll learn a lot about hard assets, and it's free. To subscribe, simply visit williamyoungerman.com and enter your name and email information on the homepage pop-up. It's that simple. Thank you for listening to today's podcast, part of our goal at William Youngerman to make you a successful hard asset investor.